Asians are descended from Genghis Khan. That's 350 million people. All Europeans living today are descendants of the same ancestors who lived 1,000 years ago. Everyone on Earth is distantly related, and research shows it is very likely that almost all people are descended from Confucius. Over a period of 7 years in the 20th century, one Bengal tiger named Champawat killed an estimated 436 people in India before it was shot dead. It was said that the tiger was the most prolific serial killer of human life the world had ever seen, and that it operated with almost supernatural efficiency. Human remains were a common ingredient in medicine up until the 20th century. People thought that ingesting a certain part of the body would help cure illnesses in that part of their own body. For example, crushed skull powder was believed to cure headaches. Mummies are so rare today because the Victorian British ate so many. After the Mongolians defeated Russian forces, the enemy commanders were laid on the ground. A huge board was placed over their bodies, which the Mongolians sat on to eat, drink and celebrate, meanwhile slowly crushing and suffocating the men beneath. In 1930s London, parents used to hang their babies in cages outside of their windows. A regular supply of fresh air was considered vital for a baby's development. The contraptions were made so that babies could still get fresh air despite not having a garden. In the late 1800s, a bout of tuberculosis unknowingly struck Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Since victims tended to look sunken, pallid, and drained, people assumed they turned into vampires. A vampire hunt soon began. When members of one particular family began dying, one after the other, the townspeople decided someone in the family must be feeding on the others. So they exhumed the bodies, suspecting that one might be undead. The 19-year-old daughter's heart contained some decayed blood, a sure sign of vampirism in those days. To prevent her from striking again, they burned her heart and liver and mixed the ashes with water. They fed this concoction to another affected person as a cure, which of course didn't work. Although this is a thing of the past for Europeans, it might not be for other parts of the world. In 2012, it was reported that thousands of pills filled with powdered human flesh was discovered in South Korea. The capsules, which were used as a medicinal cure-all, were thought to be the remains of aborted or stillborn babies, which were stored, dried, and crushed into a powder. When was first discovered in 1898, people did not realize how dangerous it was for a long time. In the 1920s, thousands of female factory workers were hired by the United States Radium Corporation to use radium to paint watch dials. It was a highly sought-after job. Unaware of the lethal properties, part of their task was to sharpen the point of their paintbrush with their teeth. They would also play around and put it on their skin and nails. Years later, workers suffered terrible radiation-related health issues, like decaying teeth, crumbling bones, and spines that crushed under their own weight. The ancient Aztecs believed in the power of human sacrifice, and many of their rituals included sacrificing women and children to serve their sun god. When they experienced drought, Aztec priests sacrificed children because they believed their tears could call on the rain. Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible, is the largest Latin manuscript known to the world. It contains a full-page portrait of Satan. People believed the manuscript contains the contract of a monk who sold his soul to Satan in the 13th century in order to escape his execution. The Roman Catholic Church in the Czech Republic, named the Bone Church, contains the bones of around 40,000 different people. These bones are all arranged in different forms, such as garlands, altars, and chandeliers. In the 1880s, while on expedition into Africa, James Jameson, the heir to a massive whiskey empire, reportedly asked to witness cannibalism in action. He purchased a 10-year-old slave girl and handed her over to men who murdered and ate her. Jameson sketched out the horrible scene while it was happening, then afterwards he went into his tent to finish the drawings with watercolor. Incestuous relationships were common in ancient Egypt. DNA samples revealed that King Tutankhamun was likely married to one of his sisters. King Tut himself was frail and suffered from a bone disorder, perhaps due to his own parentage. He died at age 19. In Saxon times, half of the population were dead before they turned 25. In Tudor times, a cook was boiled to death in a giant cauldron because he had poisoned the soup. In the 1860s illustration of the assassination of President Lincoln, the man on the far left rushing into action is Major Henry Rathbone. President and Mrs. Lincoln had asked him and his fiancée to accompany them at the theater. After Booth fired the shot, Rathbone tried to tackle him to the ground, but Booth was able to get free. Rathbone was haunted with the guilt of that night. He felt responsible for letting Booth get away. In the following years, he experienced a number of health issues from stomach ailments to heart palpitations, and his mental state deteriorated. In 1883, 18 years after the assassination, he attacked and killed his wife and attempted to kill himself. He spent the rest of his life in a mental institution. In the 1800s, dentures were made using the teeth of dead soldiers. The teeth were stolen by looters who would sell them to dental technicians, who would boil, carve, and shape them into dentures, which they would sell to the wealthy. In 1929, a man was shot dead in his laundry shop. The killer escaped, somehow leaving the door locked from the inside. No money was taken and no weapon was found. In 1494, during Italy's Renaissance period, sailors returning from the New World brought with them a massive outbreak of syphilis, which spread through the entire French army. The troops then brought it to the rest of Europe. The disease spread quickly. The skin on victims' faces would rot away from the ulcers. In some cases, the nose, lips, or other body parts were completely gone. It was perhaps the closest thing to a zombie outbreak. The Great Chinese Famine, which occurred between 1959 and 1961, was caused by poor weather and long droughts. These factors led to crop failures. The issue was compounded by agricultural policies under the leadership of Mao Zedong. The official statistic was 15 million fatalities, but other estimates said it was closer to 45 million people. Tarare was a Frenchman born in the mid-1700s, known for eating as much as a quarter of a whole cow's worth of beef per day. Over time, his appetite became extremely bizarre, eating cats, dogs, and eels. He was hospitalized for his extreme diet, and staff caught him eating corpses and drinking blood. It's believed that Tarare ate a 14-month-old baby who went missing from the hospital while he was admitted. Tarare died at the age of 26. He may have suffered from an extreme case of polyphagia, a disease that causes uncontrollable hunger and eating. Serial killer Ted Bundy worked for a suicide hotline while he was studying psychology in college. A psychologist commented, "I'm not surprised that he worked at a suicide hotline. Psychopaths will very often put themselves in a position to learn what normal people are like, so that they can blend in better by faking emotions that they learned from other people." Romans used human urine as a teeth whitener. It was also used to clean stains out of clothes after being diluted with water. They used crushed mouse brains as a toothpaste. German designer Hugo Boss made and designed Nazi uniforms. He became a sponsor of the organization, making monthly donations. As the war progressed, the company began to use slave labor from concentration camps to produce their large orders. Many people in these factories were worked to death or later sent to Auschwitz to be killed. Frederick Bohr, the inventor of Pringles, had his remains put in a Pringles can. He was so proud of his creation he insisted that his children store him in one when he died, which is exactly what they did. When asked in an interview what flavor can, they said they had decided on the classic original package. In the Stone Ages, humans would kill a bear and rip open its stomach to eat the meal the bear had consumed before it was killed. On the 26th of December 2004, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake occurred under the sea off the coast of Indonesia. The energy released was 1,500 times that of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. As a result, a tsunami went through the Indian Ocean, affecting Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, Malaysia, Madagascar, and South Africa. 230 people were estimated to have died, with a further 1.7 million displaced by it. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published his only novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, a story about a group of shipwrecked sailors who end up drawing straws to see which one of them will be eaten. The short straw is drawn by a young man named Richard Parker. 46 years later, a group of real-life men found themselves similarly stranded at sea when a 17-year-old boy among them fell violently ill. The others decided to kill and eat him for their own survival. That boy was also named Richard Parker. Every race of people have been slaves to another at some point in history, and most of them have overlapping time frames with other races. For example, over 1 million European Christians were enslaved by Muslims in North Africa between 1530 and 1780. Meanwhile, the 1600s was the beginning of African slavery in the Americas. In the 19th century, heroin was used in the US as a cough syrup for children to help them sleep, while old people were using it for pneumonia. During World War I, British women would order special hampers containing heroin to send to their loved ones on the battlefield. The nursery rhyme Jack and Jill dates back to 1765 and originated from France. Jack is actually King Louis XVI, and Jill is his queen, Marie Antoinette. The king, Jack, was beheaded due to his failure in recognizing France's financial problems. Therefore, Jack fell down and broke his crown. His queen Jill was killed shortly after. In 1979, Saddam Hussein was given the keys to Detroit City by Mayor Coleman Young after a $200,000 years have been lost and never recovered. During this time, there have been 32 nuclear weapon accidents, known as broken arrows. A broken arrow is defined as an unexpected event involving nuclear weapons that results in the accidental launching, firing, detonating, theft or loss of the weapon. Scaphism was one of the most horrifying forms of execution used by the ancient Persians. It was only ordered by the king when he really hated someone. The first step was to strip the victim naked and put them inside either a hollowed out tree or within 2 boats. The person's head, feet and arms would stick out and be exposed. Next, the victim was force-fed honey and milk until he had diarrhea and filled the trunk with his own filth. The torturers rubbed honey over the exposed parts of him to ensure insects would settle on the victim's body. Bugs would eat away at the flesh, and wasps would arrive and visually sting them over and over again. The torturers would do their best to keep him alive as long as possible by continuing the force-feeding process. At this point, the victim would be thrown into a stagnant pond still in their prison, and after a few days, their mind would start to deteriorate. Eventually, delirium set in, and when death finally came, it was normally due to septic shock, as they were eaten from the inside out. A limnic eruption is a rare event where carbon dioxide dissolved in deep water lakes suddenly erupts. These events have only been observed twice, the deadliest being Lake Neos in 1986. When a limnic eruption occurs, large clouds of carbon dioxide form, which then descend and reduce the oxygen in the air, causing living things to asphyxiate. In this instance, the cloud fell on nearby villages, causing the deaths of 1,700 people and 3,500 livestock. Chicxulub asteroid was estimated to be 6 miles wide when it hit the Earth 65 million years ago in Chicxulub, Mexico. The resulting collision is estimated to have released the equivalent of 192 gigatons of TNT. That's over 12 billion times the power of a nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It's thought to be the event that led to the extinction of dinosaurs. Anything within 600 miles of the impact zone would have been immediately incinerated. Then beyond that were earthquakes, raining molten rock, global wildfires, and subsequent volcanic eruptions for the next few thousand years. Occurring 252 million years ago was the Permian-Triassic extinction, known as the Great Dying. It was the largest extinction event on Earth. This was a butterfly effect of events and is thought to have been initially triggered by a massive volcanic eruption around an area known as the Serbian Traps in Russia. This led to something called the runaway greenhouse effect. Following the eruption, the planet suffered extensive global warming Essie began to absorb large quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It began turning into carbonic acid, killing most marine life. Due to the warmer ocean temperature, methane hydrate rapidly bubbled from the ocean surface, raising global temperatures another 5 degrees. All life forms currently on Earth have descended from the surviving 4% of species following that event. In 16th century Edinburgh, around 4,000 people were executed after being determined to be witches. Agnes Sampson, another woman accused of witchcraft, suffered a particularly horrible fate in 1590. She was accused of trying to kill King James with voodoo. She was also accused of crafting magic powders from corpses. She was executed via throwing, a process where rope is bound around the skull and tightened until the head is completely crushed. A book titled The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, was about an unsinkable ship that was hit by an iceberg. This book was written 14 years before the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. In the book, the Titan had a shortage of lifeboats, just like the Titanic. In 1915, Dr. Briggs of Blackville, South Carolina, declared 30-year-old Essie Dunbar dead after an apparent epilepsy attack. She was buried the following morning, but her sister couldn't make it until after the coffin had been lowered into the ground. When she arrived, she asked them to dig up the coffin so she could see her sister one last time. When the coffin was opened, Essie was alive. She sat up and smiled at her sister. She went on to live another 47 years, although many people believed her to be a zombie. Henry VIII married Catherine Howard when he was 50 years old, and she was around 17, younger than his own daughter, Mary I. Catherine endured sexual assault her whole life and was killed for that, at only 18 or 19. Sadly, there is hardly any information recorded about her besides this. In 1965, Bruce Reimer was born as a boy, but due to an accident, he had his genitals removed as a toddler. His parents were consulted by Dr. John Money, who specialized in sexual identity and believed that gender role was socialized. He told them to raise Bruce as Brenda, never revealing that he was born as a genetic male. This included full sex reassignment surgery and giving estrogen during puberty. Dr. Money's supposed therapy included things like instructing Bruce and his identical twin brother to strip naked and force them to act out sexual poses with each other, with Bruce playing the female role. Meanwhile, Dr. Money would photograph them. By the age of 13, Bruce threatened suicide if his parents did not stop Dr. Money's therapies. The experiment ended when Bruce learned from his parents about his birth, after suffering years of depression, anxiety, and gender dysphoria. He immediately switched his gender to male and renamed himself David. suffered from suicidal thoughts, depression, and panic attacks following Money's experiment. David followed 2 years later when he shot himself with a sawed-off shotgun in a grocery parking lot. John Money died from Parkinson's disease 3 years after. At the time of his death, he was Professor Emeritus at Johns Hopkins University. During the 1918 flu pandemic, also known as the Spanish flu, the lungs would start to get holes in them, not allowing the patient to breathe. The skin would turn blue because of lack of oxygen, and when the nurses moved the body, there would be crackling noises. There were more deaths during this pandemic than both World War I and World War II combined. Beulah Georgia Tan was an American child trafficker who operated an adoption agency in Memphis, Tennessee. Georgia used the home as a front for her black market baby adoption scheme from the 1920s. Young children were kidnapped and then either sold to wealthy families, abused, or in some cases murdered. A state investigation into adoption fraud led to the closure of the agency in 1950. Georgia died of cancer before the investigation findings were made public. Georgia's customs normalized adoption in America, and many of her adoption policies that were designed to hide the origin of the children have become standard practice today. During World War I, on the Eastern Front, Germany and Russia were in battle when German troops deployed mustard gas onto the Russians. The Russians emerged from the gas smoke, throwing up blood, and blood leaking from their nose and eyes. Their skin turned yellow and pale. They looked like zombies. The German troops were so frightened that they abandoned their positions and retreated. It was later called the Attack of the Dead Men. Persians used to tie cats to their shields during their war against Egypt because it was against Egyptian law to kill cats. Some ancient cultures knew that they could control population growth by denying fertile females both fats and carbohydrates. This process guaranteed that embryos would not mature in the womb due to the lack of food energy derived from the mothers. The embryo would self-abort since a certain ratio of body fat is required for successful pregnancy. From the fall of the Roman Empire up until the mid-19th century, the majority of cities in Europe did not have sewer systems. City planners did not build sewers until it was proven in 1855 that the cause for all the cholera epidemics was drinking water contaminated by human feces. Charles V. Smith was the last man to ever be convicted of blasphemy in the United States in 1928. He served a short sentence of 3 months, and he got this by renting a storefront and posting a sign which said, "Evolution is true, the Bible is a lie, God is a ghost." The Spanish House of Habsburg inbred so much that they killed off their dynasty. The last of the family was Charles II, always on the verge of death, but repeatedly baffling Christendom by continuing to live. Charles suffered from so many illnesses that he was nicknamed the Hexed. He eventually died at the age of 39 without an heir, which triggered the War of the Spanish Succession. All Spartan babies were brought before a council of inspectors, and they were examined for physical defects. Those who were not up to standards were left to die on a hillside. To test their strength, Spartan babies were often bathed in wine instead of water. They were also frequently ignored when they cried, and were commanded never to fear darkness or solitude. One of Sparta's most brutal practices involved a so-called contest of endurance, in which teenagers were flogged, sometimes to the death, in front of an altar. This annual practice was originally used as both a religious ritual and a test of the boys' bravery and resistance to pain. The Aztecs performed massive human sacrifices using slaves. In one event, over 10,000 slaves had their hearts torn out while still alive. The blood permanently stained the pyramid. Later, thousands of natives joined together to get rid of the Aztec Empire. Over 90% of the army against the Aztecs was made up of former Aztec slaves. From 1852, most of the 80,000 French prisoners who were sent to Devil's Island prison never returned to France. Many died due to disease and harsh conditions. The only exit from the island was by water, and very few escaped. France forced its convicts to stay on the islands even after they were released in order to pay for their prison stay. That is the end of this video. Thank you for watching.